Hello friends, and welcome back to another episode of Tales from the Haunted Victorian, where I recount true paranormal experiences that happened to me and my family in an old haunted house in St. John's, Newfoundland, Canada. If this is your first time joining us, I'll be sure to link the other episodes in the description box below so you can go back and listen to the story from the beginning. But on this episode, I would like to start to tell you the continuing story. So what I mean from the continuing story is that after we moved out of the Haunted Victorian and I moved out on my own, I did still experience a high level of paranormal activity because I am an empath and a spirit sensitive, and that's just the life that I lead, being sensitive to the spirit world. I still have a lot of contact with the other side, so I would still like to continue to share those stories with you. So on the last episode, I described what happened after we moved out of the house, and I'll just back it up just a little bit because there was one tidbit that I had completely left out, and also the video was quite long. So I'll just kind of back it up a little bit and fill in some of the gaps, and I'll start telling you the stories of what happened afterwards. So like I said in the last episode, my family stopped experiencing paranormal activity after I was brought into the house. My mom always said that the house was settled and the atmosphere felt lighter after I was brought home from the hospital. But little did they know that it was me who started to experience all of the paranormal activity, and I would assume, like is a theory with a lot of people, that the spirits just sensed that I was already open to them, so they continued to show themselves to me. So like I said before, there were the ghosts of several children on the property, but there was one thing that did scare me. It was the only thing in the house that scared me, and it was something that would hide under the beds. So like I described on the last episode, I did have something that was under my bed that had a very low, sort of half animalistic, half human sort of voice, and it was very gravelly, and it would whisper and it would talk underneath my bed, and sometimes I would have a whole fist that would be driven up through my mattress. So on many a night I would jump out of my bed as far as I could and head for the door and go spend the night in my brother's room with him. And after he moved out, so we moved out in February of 1994, but the year previous he had moved out and he had a bigger room than I did. He had a bigger bed and there was a TV in there and stuff. So I spent a great deal of time in his old bedroom after he moved out, and whatever was under my bed in my room decided it was going to follow me out there. And my one and only experience that I'd had with it actually making like full physical contact scared the heck out of me. So I was in my brother's old room watching TV one night, and back in the day, this is when we actually had to wait for a commercial to come on before we could go use the bathroom or whatever. You couldn't pause TV back then, or there was no streaming services. So I was watching TV and a commercial came on. So I hopped out of bed and headed for the door so I could go use the bathroom. And there was absolutely nothing that was obscuring my space between the bed and the bedroom door. There was nothing there. So when my feet kind of hit the floor and I started to run, something from under the bed grabbed onto my ankle very, very hard, and I was completely upended and face planted into the ground, and I actually really knocked the wind out of myself that night. And it was to the point where, I don't know if you've ever had someone grab you around the ankle or grab you around the wrist, and it almost feels like it's your whole leg or your whole arm is being pulled. Just the muscles are really pulled, and that's exactly what I experienced. So like I said, even if there was anything on the floor in the way, I wouldn't have experienced an actual like hand with an iron grip gripping me around the ankle. And of course I was stunned, and I just kind of looked around, didn't see anything, and I verified at that point that I hadn't tripped over anything. There was absolutely nothing on the floor between the bed and the door. So that was one of the times that I was super scared in the house. it didn't happen very often. I was never brought up to fear spirits or anything like that, but that did actually scare me. So the thing under the bed was definitely scary, but the other entities in the house were not. So I left that one out of the last episode, so I wanted to back up a little bit and add that one in. So like I said, in February of 1994, we moved out of that house and we actually moved to a different town and into a new house that I didn't really have a whole lot of experiences in that house, almost none. The only experiences that I continued to have were if I was telling the stories, sometimes crazy things would happen, which I went over in a previous episode as well, or the continuing dreams about the man in the top hat and a dark figure that would always throw me down over the stairs. So I did continue to have experiences in other places though. If we went into a particular house or, you know, whatever we were walking into, I started to realize that I could sense the energy of my surroundings and the energies that other people were giving off. So that's kind of when I started to figure out that, you know, it wasn't just the house that we were living in, it was also myself. So I wanted to retell the story that I told right at the end of the last episode as well, because like I said, the episode was quite long and it was a little while ago that I did it. So when we were living in this new house after we moved out of the Haunted Victorian, my brother and sister-in-law and his daughter were also living in Newfoundland at the time, and they were staying in a basement apartment. And like I recounted in the last episode, it seems to be that the females on my mom's side are extremely sensitive to spirit activity, very open. So my mom is very sensitive, she's an empath, and then I am, and my oldest niece as well. So we'll call her Kay, and when she was about, I'd say between 3 and 4 years old maybe, I'd say she was about 3. She was home playing in her room and her mom was out sitting on the couch watching TV. And she was playing with her toys and, you know, like most young children do, she was talking and acting out a role play with her toys. But after a while, my sister-in-law noticed that the conversation was very like an actual one-sided conversation. It wasn't like she was voicing for her dolls. It was like she was actually talking to someone. So my sister-in-law called out to her and she said, "Kay, who are you talking to?" And Kay said, "I'm talking to the little boy." So my sister-in-law said, "Kay, come see me for a second." So she came out and she was like, "Who are you talking to?" And Kay said, "Mom, there's a little boy in my room and he says, 'Shh, he's going to show me magic tricks.'" And that completely freaked out my poor sister-in-law. She is quite scared of anything that has to do with the paranormal. She doesn't want to have anything to do with it. It really freaks her out. So she was completely freaked out at that point. Of course, she went in and there was nobody in the room. And there were several occasions when my niece would say that she could see people or spirits or whatever. And just like with me, she didn't seem to be scared of anything. It was just kind of there. So I wanted to retell that story because when I decided to move out of my parents' house, I had made the decision to move to Alberta from Newfoundland to try to see if I could get better work up here. And when I first moved here, my brother and sister-in-law, and they had 2 daughters at this time, were also living in Alberta. So I moved in with them for about 6 months until I could kind of get on my feet and figure things out. And, you know, I was only like 19 years old, so kind of had to figure everything out for myself. So they very kindly let me stay with them. And my poor sister-in-law, I don't think she liked me staying in the house very much because she knew that not only was our old Victorian haunted, but that I was also very in tune with the spirit world and that I was an empath. So there was one night where she was home by herself and just with the girls. So I mean, the girls were really young, like maybe like 2 and 4 or 3 and 5. And so she was home by herself, and at the time my brother was a street cop, so he worked shift work, and she was home at night and just kind of sitting in the living room watching TV. The girls were upstairs in bed, and I was gone out with my boyfriend at the time, who later became my husband. And so she was home alone, and all of a sudden she started hearing somebody downstairs in the basement. Somebody was throwing things around and walking around, and she could hear banging and all that kind of stuff. And she was completely terrified, and she knew that there was like nobody in the house. She knew it was spirit activity, but she actually took the coffee table and jammed it up against the door that was leading into the basement, and she was completely freaked out. She called my brother and asked him to come home, and he was like, well, I'm on shift, I can't just come home. And so anyway, she just kind of had to deal with it. She was completely freaked out. And later in the evening, I came home, and she was furious, and she looked at me and she said, what the F did you bring into my house? And I was totally taken aback. I was like, what are you talking about? So she told me the whole story, and I was like, well, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I can't control the spirit activity that's happening in your house, but you know, I kind of knew at the same time that it probably was, because I was staying there, and as well, I mean, Kay was there as well. And so with 2 spiritual empaths in the house, you're bound to have activity. Absolutely. It doesn't matter how old or young they are. So I remember she was completely freaked out about that, and both she and I, at separate times, and we kind of compared notes later down the road, we would kind of see the entity of a young toddler upstairs, and she would think it was actually her own one of her own daughters, but it wasn't, and they would just giggle and run between the rooms. So again, nothing sinister, but with some people it doesn't matter if it's an angry haunting, demonic, you know, just a residual haunting, intelligent haunting. It doesn't matter. They don't want to have anything to do with it, and I completely understand that. I understand where they're coming from. It can be very scary because it's out of your control. But the next thing that happened while I was staying there, we still talk about to this day. And it was absolutely crazy because we were both wide awake. We were both sitting on the couches in the living room, and there was absolutely no way that this could have happened. And my brother tried to kind of rationalize it, but no matter which way he tried to rationalize it, we were like, no, that doesn't really make any sense. So, and keep in mind that we had seen the spirit of a toddler in the house. So for one of the girls' birthdays, I can't remember which one, they had gotten her one of those foil mylar sort of balloons that was filled with helium. And you know very well, after a balloon has been there for a couple of days, it does start to, you know, sag, and it comes down, and it can move on its own with the air currents in the house. Absolutely. But what happened on this specific night, there's absolutely no way that that balloon would have moved this way. So, and I remember exactly where I was sitting in the living room when this happened. So I was home, my sister-in-law was home, and the balloon was in the kitchen. It had been in the kitchen for the past day or two in the exact same spot. It hadn't moved out of this spot. You could see that it was starting to lose its helium, but it was still in the same spot. And this was in the evening, so it was dark out, and we were sitting there watching a movie or watching TV and just chatting. And all of a sudden, the balloon came out of the kitchen, and in order to get to the stairs, to go upstairs, it had to come past us. So we could see the ribbon on the balloon was kind of tight, like somebody was holding onto it. And the balloon very, very slowly came out of the kitchen, through the entire living room. It turned, it made a complete 90-degree turn, went up the 3 or 4 steps to the landing, made another 90-degree turn, went up over the steps to the top floor, and floated down the hallway. And it actually managed to dip under the lintel of the door of the room that I was staying in, and it floated to the back corner of that room. And then it was back up again, like up to the ceiling. So we were gobsmacked. We couldn't believe it. And of course, like I said, my brother tried to explain it away by saying, oh, well, you know, it was just air currents or whatever. But I could, like, I mean, you know, you've experienced these balloons before. You know that they're not going to make a 90-degree turn, another 90-degree turn, go up over the stairs, dip under the lintel of a door frame, and then float to the back corner of a room when, like, it just, there's absolutely no way it would have happened. And we were totally gobsmacked. After we watched it float up the stairs, and like I said, it was like it had a ribbon dangling from it, and it was like somebody was actually carrying it along. And we went upstairs, and I was like, it actually went into the back corner of my room. We couldn't believe it. But of course, I kind of put 2 and 2 together that if we were seeing the specter of a toddler, which doesn't mean that a toddler died in that house. It's just that when you have empaths in a particular space, sometimes spirits that are crossing through, they will kind of see them as a beacon, and they're just, you know, you'll see them just as they're passing over. So that was completely freaky. It was totally, totally freaky. And we continued to experience some paranormal activity in that house while I was staying there. And as far as I know, they didn't experience anything after I left from that house. They never ever said anything about it afterwards, which I'm sure if they did, she probably would have told me. And then about 6 months later, my boyfriend at the time and he later became my husband, decided that we were going to move in together. And that's where things kind of get really sort of freaky. So the first part of all of those experiences that I started to experience when my husband and I moved in together, I will start telling you guys in the next episode. But for now, that's all I have for this episode of Tales from the Haunted Victorian. Until next time, everybody, sweet dreams.